Troy of the Western Sea, Loving Carnage under the rule of the Vandal King Genseric, by Timothy Matthew Haggerty. Act 1. The Pirates of the Mare Africa. Chapter 1. The Gemini Thermae. The Ubis River in Numidia, 429 Anno Domini. It began in the year 427 Anno Domini with the forgery of a letter to a queen, who had to have iron balls or impunity from getting caught to lie to a woman such as her, Gallia Placidia. The two suspects had both in turn. The Western Roman Empire, imparted to the arrogant boy on Honors by the older decree of the Theodosian dynasty, was in turmoil. As the Germanic peoples were swept westward, crossing the deep and wide Rhine River into the dead winter into Gaul and Spain, where the Visigoths now dwelt, even to Galatia and Lusitania, the edge of the world. The Visigoths had been the arbiter of vengeance to Rome, but when they came to terms, the wrath upon us in the south of Spain, where we had fled under our king Gunderic, had gifted us with our Salingi people once more, those who had fled from the mountains of Rhaetia in the times of Marcus Aurelius. Nero may have fiddled when the great fire had consumed Rome, but it was Honorius who played bean counter on fop in Ravenna, as Rome had perished to the furor of Alaric, the Visigoth king, incensed by his many denials of his rightful command and service to Rome. That and the slaughter of his people by the general Sarus, and the betrayal of the half-Vandal Flavius Stilicho, who then served as high command and had tipped the scales. The Vandals were my people, the Hastingi, and we had traveled across the world for gentle climes, far from the steppe-ranging Huns and the swells of other violent Germanic groups such as the enemy, the Suebi, and the competitor, the Bessi. Such was the estrangement of the Theodosian rulers from his people that Honorius had confused the sack of Rome with the death of his pet chicken, named Rome. As regent over the west, the regent Gallia Placidia ruled until her young son Valentinian III would come of age. Her magisters were Felix and Sigivultus, and her greatest generals were Flavius Aetius, of much renown here as in all corners of the world, and Count Bonifacius. These two generals and the third, the magister Flavius Constantius Felix, combated in the missives for the favor of the empress regent, and they would one day serve her son, and it was from one of these many missives, believed to be sent by the Count Flavius Aetius, the last true Roman, or perhaps Felix himself, that contained a message to Bonifacius the Count not to accept a recall to the city of Ravenna, the northeastern capital of the West, under any circumstances. Felix had then very deceitfully convinced the queen that Bonifacius meant an insurrection from his refusal to return home when she summoned him, and he was given the initiative to bring him to heel before he could forge his own empire in the breadbasket of Rome, or so they said at the time. The armies of Mavortius and Gallio, along the Hunnic foederati Sanoesis, were sent to take Carthage on behalf of Flavius Felix, and Bonifacius appealed for aid to end the tragic misunderstanding with minimal bloodshed. It was Genseric, new king of the Vandals and Alans, who slowly answered. Their final answer would change history. Of those who accepted the call for aid was a pilot quadrienne to meet privateers of the Count, a ship called the Nitrum Sagittam, the Black Arrow, and Centurio Tolgus. Me, I just cleaned the blood, swill, sweat, and fouler things from the deck. Few things smell smellier than vomit and breeding insects, and a spleen was one of them. I would know that of the rank both by the time I was 16 years of age. One of the drunk thugs that manned the boat, and one of the dead Hun, who them and I had gutted with a hook spatula. During this conflict, the tradeways from Naples to Reggio and Syracusa were ripe for exploiting the rodent-like scurrying of merchant vessels, taking their wares elsewhere, and it was in these cases we served the Count best, paid through an intermediary as privateers. My name is Galareth, having the same name as the youngest son of Gentos, son of Genseric Spear King, High King of the Vandals and Alans. My story begins in the 16th year of my life, just as I was beginning to become bold enough not to man, just ask answers, and place my hands on women and draw my sword without the command of our sea captain. I had known no home other than my ship, the Nitrum Sagittam, and no father other than Tolgus the Four-Fingered, the pirate, the emaciated, russet and curled-head Ritrigius, an oarsman who cared for my mother after he or some other Sueve greater in Galatia had forced himself on her. My father, Politius, was cold, after teaching me how to use the sextant, killed in war with the Federate Bessi, liberating the Alani king Atashus' horde in Baetica, along with the Salingi Vandals who had settled there. and as soon as he had taught me what my loins were for to replicate this travesty, I took his bent and rusted sword, buried him in a shallow hole, and half-assed, as meek as my boy arms would allow, and joined the first boat that would take me to the deck swabber as a deck swabber to Mauritania, just by chance, run by criminals. Our crew had left 2 years before the armada sent by Genseric, who seated his brethren, your Lord and our Saviour, 428 Anno Domini, as supplicants to Bonifacius, seeking pardons. I was too young and naive to know that I had committed no crime, still my betters confined me to be a whipping boy for many crimes, and the dispatcher of many more. My father had spoken of a land where my mother would not have starved, giving her last strength to my birth, where the grain was nearly as abundant as Alexandria and the river Nile, where people would be welcomed in all the coldness and darkness we had fled to a warm fire and a warm, sunless land. He had given me only the compass to find it. I had stolen away instead at my master's instructions from cold hands, sleeping hands, and broken purse strings and vaults. It takes a lot more than one would think to rob a man of his values, his merchant ship, his necessities, and then, finally, his life. It takes an absolution from the promise of the 9 circles of hell in the form of momentary gain. Doubly so if you were raised not to thieve, not to kill, not to reach out for what wasn't yours. Strength and character could only raise me so far. To thrive, I would have to learn the way the world worked, and the way of the world was not fair. We didn't choose this life. Few wanted to plunder the seas, the most treacherous of any ply, I thought, looking at the grey-huddled scullion, the prorata, on the lookout at the bow, called the spider, rocking himself, his bone-red ribs expanding with each breath, while his nimble hands weaved at some fabric feverishly. The boat would rock with the pulse of the river Ubis, interrupting his pace, and then the quick hands would loop the thread over the cradle, splayed over his lap like a crucifix. He was taking advantage of the lulls in the waves. We were close to the dock, and it was licked by the tides of the docks near Kalama, near the edge of Africa, Conciliaris, and Numidia. The sully Berber and sully Vandal sailors, tippers, and oarsmen paid as much attention to him as a fly as they gambled. When an axe murderer kills his wife, he doesn't start the story of when she angered him, but when a forager errantly left an axe nearby his lodging. All have a way of saying the story did not start when the chroniclers paid attention to it, and my story was no different than the scorn of fortune had left us to a life of thievery and murder on the Mare African. It was only worth telling, as it turned out, to the favor of Commissus Magister Utrilius Militari of Emperor Gallia Placidia, Count Bonifacius. This title meant he was commander of the horse army and commander of the infantry. Piracy had turned to seamanship with the stroke of his pen, and for our transgressions and thankfulness to the course that had blessed us, we were cursed by noble cutthroats and much finer titles than us yet. Genseric the Lame was coming by sea to Africa, at the head of a host of 20,000 Vandals, Alans, and others in his umbrage. The king, not yet great, had lost his ability to mount a horse by being fucked into the dirt by a riding accident, so turned his ships for his desires of riches. The dead were counted, 5 crewmen of ours killed in fighting with Sigilvoltus after the infighting that had consumed Gallia and Malivortus at the walls of Carthage. The last man standing was Psammetichus the Hun, and he had the worst fate of all, before an envoy of the Empress Regent, Darius, had been persuaded by Bonifacius that the letter sent to him was a forgery. A 3-year struggle with hundreds dead, a power ployed by some faceless plotter. As much to secure his own power on the mainland as to distance himself from our disaster, Aetius accused Flavius Felix of plotting against him, and gave a personal order for him to be arrested. Gallia Placidia was not a woman to be crossed. For his ill counsel to start an expedition against Bonifacius, she had Flavius Felix, his wife Pedusia, and a deacon arrested and hung by their necks. Her sentence ensued the strife with finality that Bonifacius was back in favor in the court of Ravenna. Why then, now at the end of this, the beginning of the arrival of my former people's horde, would Bonifacius welcome Genseric, their king at Kalama? If Aetius were believed, they had been invited for it by him, when he was at his most vulnerable. But choices had to be made. How great this number of civilians and soldiers would serve as federates to the Council of Africa. And this choice would have to be made quickly, as Genseric had landed and was making way for Kalama at marching pace. I had chosen the Roman Empire. I had chosen the favor of a man I had killed for, a vessel I might yet serve higher than the ensign, and an empress who had now taken the victor back into the fold. The woman at my side, of loose morals but bright in the eyes from my youth, and a carved figure and ambition, had chosen Bonifacius as well. She was a Roman tout of some Germanic stock, with pale cerulean eyes in contrast to her tanned olive skin. The sun had a way of curling our skin like staunch letters, and bull coils of golden brown hair cropped at the right side of her face with a gouge that led up to a cropped ear, from when one of her clients did not approve of her services. We had left the client with much less. She could lull Gladiator with her words alone and serenade a Comes and his staff to a standing ovation, but instead she had chosen lucre by the lace and dagger. Caesarea, she was called for her hearing impairment, not because she would dress as Gallic Placidia to please bidders, though she let the men call her either way so long as she could hear them, as long as they would bid for her services, and not by so many pregnancies. The brand of ink on her hand and the sigil of a sea urchin or caltrop, other services were offered, the sort we needed by our crew. At every port of call there were gullible men, and gullible men were lucky to leave their ports with their lives, or would pay to end those of other ports who had connived them or cheated them. Life on our decks had given me a swarthy face of black burns where the wind and waves had scored my face with golden hair. I called her hair the cat because it raked me when she rode me. Only in Iberia's were tangled of gold or sheer ravens so whipped, and it was like a bridle to hold her when her back arched. She tousled that hair of mine and looked me in the flint eyes, determined for what we must do, casting the blues down to my arm, where cold writing was etched, war rights, as she, poor star-cursed Lycurgus, my friend, and the archer Sagittarius, first mate, and Amunos Natus of his Nigrum Sagittara with a quiver and curved Parthian bow on his back, walked from the hull of our ship to the port side, where the pier awaited the dying dead day and sunset of the red sparkling Median river, the Ubis. Called so for the Ubo, the local name of Hippo, or Hippo Regius to the east, and its port, the Aphrodisian. The writing on my arm, the curled, twisting flourishes, the acute, bright beaks of the Aleph, were an extinct form of writing from the port of Cortinia on the island of Crete. It all looked indistinguishable to Sagittarius and Togus, but to Caesarea, who had robbed a scribe of biblical texts to be sent from Ctesiphon in Persia, where Zoroastrianism was more palatable placebo than the Lord, she had learned what those symbols meant by his trove of writings, one of the many benefits of lifting heavy chests, and not the drained body of a cowering monk. We walked from the ship, getting a footing with bequeazy legs, and then taking a firm stride. We walked along the pier where fishermen plied their last luck of the day, but the bitter smell of gar and fish guts would thicken the air, the thick smell of salt, the briny river flowing down from the Mediterranean where we had sailed, and were stationed to greet the first runners of Gennesaret's thaw. We were dressed in the finest clothes we had dried upon the ship days before, and they carefully were hung. The rewards of loyalty to Count Bonifacius must be demonstrated by our fellow barbarian, some of which were only hides and furs from their times in Spain. Imagine us, lords of Vandals, first of the federates to come, Sagittarius said with mirth. Lycurgus was wrapped in swathes of white cloth to mask his face, and he briskly tightened the wrap around his eyes. These are a tame sort to his Aurea. They spit, but they don't bite. To the revel, friend, he said to him and I, mounting upon a camel at the entrance of the pier. We rode for several quarter hours until the red river and the stars began sparkling in the dusky pink skies above Kalama, the well-lit thickets which was our destination, and the muttering groans of elephants could be heard. The sounds of Caranjo reached our ears, pipes made from goat bladders and their skins had been made in this land for millennia. But we did not feel safe on the road until we heard the leers of the taverns and the chanting in the amphitheater for Bonifacius, the council. We left our camels at a manger and walked through Kalama's stucco and marble buildings on the narrow avenues that led to the souks gleaming with oils and precious metals, some hung on strings, some ornate strings hung on rings and discs of gold. The fat of the land had made people here raucous and complacent. Roman citizens drank and danced within their homes, mingling with each other, rocking their immodest bodies, a distraction to us as much as the plebeian and slave classes, who toiled even at this late hour, with brooms and sticks, holding their tempers and dignity, when an euphoria would break, thrown by the riotous party attendee. We approached the awning of a starch tent with the smell of salt, set up the entrance of the marble arch ringed by pillars. Within were the Gemini Thermae, the twin baths, the most outlying baths in Numidia, and a place of renown and excess we had visited only twice, where our skipper told us, now partied, celebrating his final decision of the course of our vessel. The doorkeeper approached us as we neared the moorings of the tent and asked our names. Friends of Treyarchus Tolgus, the loyal servant of Count Bonapatch, Sagittarius answered, leaving his bow with the doorman, and quickly bowed his head upon those words. The Treyarchus was the captain of any independent vessel. They commanded respect, and he might be tipped for expedient obedience. This was Tolgus's night. A beautiful nude woman of dusty exotic extraction with coal eyelashes waved us as we entered the archway. Sitting on a small bench of stone by the entrance were two Roman garrison, quarreled in whispers, pointing fingers clearly about who was supposed to be on guard. She was covered in a silver powder and reeked of frankincense. She let her perky tits perk like two buttresses on her sculpted hand abdominals from bulbous shiny muscle, and she covered her chest as soon as she saw Sagittarius make an unsuspected sign of the cross. This was a sinful town, but there was no code among Vandals or Romans of being nude as gods made you in the baths. What she might have missed, blushing, is that nudity was a sign of subjugation and humiliation among my people, the Vandals, especially to arriving killers and cutthroats. A Vandalic stripping was not complete without the maiming indignity of losing one's scalp. He's a sarcastic one, be as you are, and perhaps I'll see you inside, I told her as we walked to the first level of the baths. Don't follow my steps, boy. This isn't all for you, she laughed. She was not a working girl, rather an employee of the establishment to put people at ease of their own ambitions as they entered the Gemini Thermae. The two faces, unchanged in their pagan appearance even after conversion to Nicene Christianity, greeted us like a gargoyle on the entrance slab above the baths. One face looked in one direction, the other in another. Whether it was Giannis, the two halves of the time of mortal life would only be complete when they met again, or the twins, Pollux and Castor, I did not know. But the beard of one of the faces told me this was a place where people went to find themselves. Perhaps the more animal, perhaps the more egregious part, perhaps the more meditative part of solace. This place offered both, but only the orgies of wine and gambling. This is not. More water waves carried plates of dormouse, pickled eels, olives, thrushes, and grapes of wooden cups of wine. The air smelled sweet, and the glow of the place was blue lighting upon percolating water's reflection on the walls, mixed with oranges of torches upon the walls. People swam, and in the air, thick with humility and steam, only absorbed the earthy smell that melted from their bodies into the hot water, and perfumes of burning incense all around 100 dancers, patrons, friends of Tolgus, debtors of Tolgus, and friends of Bonapatchus. Lycurgus and I entered and spoke as we always had, with our dire intentions not even breaking the surface. None knew Lycurgus's proper name. He was called so because he had rebelled against God. He had made the sign of the cross every time he wiped his ass. Life had not been kind to him in civilized society. What insults could be excused in polite company could not be excused on the high sea, and he was a bastard of a looter, even taking the metal dentures and golden teeth of his victims as enemies. Every time a prisoner was short with him, he'd give him a scar. He had no illusions about the Christian way, and that made him invaluable when dealing with pragmatic matters that required quick solutions. I had never expected him to do the right thing, just to do right by me, and that took real bonds between men. Ours was through the rights of sports. I knew he could never bring himself to kill me because despite his sterling reputation of never harming the crew, he'd lose the only other person who knew how to bet it all on a dare. He had another dare for me in the present. The goods have no risk. Now the grocery clerk, that's a risk. Go back there and tell that door lady your girlfriend's always busy. She already spurns nice indignity and decency. Clearly bait, it's easier for him to throw you out the door that way, I answered. Caesarea isn't too busy me, I nodded as she approached. He's sitting over there, I'll celebrate with him if all goes well, Caesarea said to me, putting her soft hand on my shoulder. The urchin dived into the crook of her thumb, and pointing finger was a good reminder to never forget what she was. I approached my adopted father, the man who had taken to a servant with no sins in my name, and made just the list growing longer and longer. I may have taken the job as a young fool, but he had changed me into someone who would never fall for such a trick again. "Gal, my boys," he said as I approached in merriment. He embraced me, wearing nothing but a caress and a loincloth, and offered me a cup of wine, which I took greedily and began drinking to quench my parched throat of the trip many miles by the Niger and Sagittarius, only lemons and bilge water to help me there. How many times have I told you about that cursed mummery on your arms? We're not at war, not yet. But Genserick's army approaches. We may still yet need the language of Carthage to aid us in our defense, I answered. A land army. The benefits of our partnership with Bonifacius are at an end. We have only his blessings and memories to help us along our new chart. We're here to celebrate the annual renewal of our contract with the Count, to celebrate the peace between the Empire and her servants, are we not? I asked cautiously. All your time in Tingitania and you still don't know, Tolga smiled at me as if I were simple. With the war that caused your own departure, Togas laughed heartily. Everything we seized when you were a boy, lines from the Atlas Mountain, Roman wines from the best vineyards of Spain, bejeweled marble busts of patricians, from Segobriga to Asturias, the Spanish coin. Most of these things, dear God, have not left Spain since the time of Gnaeus Pompey, and then Marcus Lepidus, and then the Tetrarchy. War causes the sea to swell with heirlooms, exports the travel with the country until that country is in ruins. Only then does it leave for another birth of the empire, and when it's there, nearly there, we intercept it. We're the corrupt customs of failed states. I don't follow what the Count is relying on, I said then, seeing his bemusement in the empty eyes of someone who sees a naive woman. Genseric, the high sea king of the Haustingi, Salingi, and Alans, is coming from Mauritania with the host that Bonifacius cannot appease forever. Bonifacius, our patron, will not need seamen, he'll need soldiers to stem their tide. After that bloody mess with the Huns of Sanoeches, you don't want us to be a soldier any more than I do. Peace means no chaos at sea. We're rich because of the misunderstanding between the Empress and the Count. Without them, we'd be renegades or beggars. Peace means the life we've chosen will not be pardoned a second time, and peace means we'd be second-class citizens in Galba City as Carthage, rather than forced in his port village of Genseric's. We're sailors at heart, Gale, and Genseric loves the seas. He cannot ride a horse. I'm ending our lease on contracts to the Count tonight. Be sure you're ready for my commands when our people arrive here in Kalama. We deliver to the gates of Hyperregis will be much more to Genseric than first in this petty place. I held my temper and bowed my head, and if I remember right, I made a fist and heard words next to me. Such Harris back on the boat had already told me in his privilege of hearing first that was our captain's course for us, and I needed to hear it for myself. We had grown respectable in our service to Carthage and Hyperregis. We had fine clothes and ours paid for finer things and a stable place of employment. What bothered me the most is that we had Bonifacius's trust and respect, and that it had been hard gained. I didn't like some things about the Roman way, mostly the thoughts about God who had bestowed his glory on the whim of a man's era that existed since time eternal rather than created it when he needed to change that word, and all the same, and worse as Constantine. But their way had become mine. We spoke the language, not the Vandalic Germanic. But still I spoke to my Vandalic captain in the Vandalic tongue. Els escape amatia drekan. Cheers, and eat and drink, and then think it over, my friend, my Triarchus. The Gaul. We could have Roman wives at the time, and the truth was, Sagittarius had said, that if we stayed on our current course, Genseric would likely serve Bonifacius as a federate force, with no ill will existing between them. What peace would come here at Kalama. I have thought it over. Now be my messenger, as you reliably have done, and tell this to the Count Bonifacius who bathes below in the sun, that we intend to sail up the river for the sea after paying all our debts and serving the imperial fleet. I took my leave, eating in the dirt, and followed the dark scent of grime to the stairway of the baths that led to the sauna beneath us. The stairs were slick both with the mud and the salt that had named the city, and the sand that had sloughed off the bathers the oily water. I kept my lips pursed, avoiding any hint of my intentions to anyone who might traverse the stairs. I became all too aware of Roman soldiers in a column along the walls, and I walked to the last stairs and entered the sauna, wooden boards set upon steam, a deep pool of disinterested, drunk or otherwise imbibed patrons who laughed upon it as I entered. Upon one of the wooden pallets lay the Count Bonifacius. His son-in-law Sebastianus stood, a tall and surly man of roughly hewn features, but he was a general soldier after his father-in-law's heart. Let him pass, Herculi, signors. This is the servant of our host, Bonifacius said, referring to the veteran's loyal Goths, his eyes still closed. I didn't know how he could have known it was I. The stink of fish and salt, I guessed. You have bad news for me, I can tell by the way you pant and saber gallop, he said, his eyes still closed. We intend to desert you, without pay, of course. Toga is signing off from our contract, I answered. Then adding hesitantly, our boat will sail north to join the Imperial Armada of the Aspar the Allen. Aspar the Allen, who's poised to strike here should things go awry, just as we've reeled the thrashing fish in, and we're deciding to club it. Yes, that Aryan captain here thinks we're if there was a good reason to say, God himself would have provided it. Just as I honored the captain and thank you for all your years of service, your better angels all exist, and loyalty is one of them. If you're not convinced, perhaps tripling the pay of your boat will bring you around. He waved his hand. Our Triarchus fears his countrymen will be hostile when Genseric arrives. He fears your good nature will take them as lambs, as gifts, and not see from the wolves they are, like Troy. I answered. I could hardly speak at the night, as much fear as I was in the presence of the man. Ah, Troy, we are in the Gemini Thermae. Genseric is a man of pride. When he arrives at Kalam, his intentions will be revealed by the stoop of his bloody crippled knee. His rebel are more than an army than building materials a house. He will meet us seeking shelter at Kalama, and will meet him not as a beachfront, but a stone that has weathered time. You only need to fear what Adius will do when his regency is past, as he has young Valentinian in his letter and his oaths in his hands. He is not a patrician like I, you know. Genseric will bow to the Empress and I, and bow low, or this refugee will see none of Africa's mercy and sustenance from his weary trek. I will raise your offer to Tolgus Liege, I said. The crew serves you still, but orders are orders. My offer was to you and you alone, Galareth. Is that understood? Bonfetch said, opening his eyes and taking a seat on the wooden board, staring in the eyes with his mud-pool golden brown eyes and the fierce shocks of black hair mussed over from the waters. I took up the bravery that Sagittarius and Caesarius' confidence would give me. I decline your offer. Our terms of service will become the same. There will be no tripling. If you speak true, then have your Herculani fetch me a rudis and pitch coal, and I'll carve the contract in the flesh of my arm, deciphered by those who still serve you. When I emerged from the sauna stair, slick with the water's condensation, Caesarea approached. Her breast and cheeks reddened for wine. How did Comus Bonifacius reply? Not well, Caesarea. He ranted for some time and then demanded me of arm wrestling. Take a dip in the waters, then? She said as I shrugged. You're lathered already, she answered with concern. If he begs more of us, I will answer with iron, I said with edge to my voice. Are you sure you have the strength? She asked warily. I tore off my wet tunic, throwing it to a couch, and pulled myself up with the raptor's glow-hanging beam. The strain flexed on the Phoenician symbols on my arm. She admired my form and nodded approvingly. You do that. A plump, healthy woman took a seat to the table opposite of Tolgus. A dash of Berber in her exotic eyes when the Hellenic-style bore into his heart, which fluttered at first, then softened its pace, and looked down with a smile and contentment. Anything to divert her eyes from his giant spud-covered head and violet curls of beard shanks. His guarded privateers unsheathed their sword a bit, but he waved them down, procuring tender from his sash. Her hair was curly like golden fleece, probably an Egyptian. The loyalty to the dominant didn't matter. They worshipped only the coin. But it was reassured that whatever jackals had sired this one probably fought for Gallia's Placidia. Sagittarius and Lycurgus nearly unsheathed their swords, giddy from some unknown urge, wild in their eyes as they looked to Caesarea and I. But I would allow, then, our captain to sit and enjoy his party. I thought of unsheathing my sword as well. Caesarea has brought me a gift. Before you and your brothers rob every vandal camp-fathering Genseric's weight. Your name, my Hellenic lamb-haired lady? Marjoria, my Greek lady sits upon the velvet cushions, eating red grapes, waiting for the handsome son of the Hastings to defend our Varian honor, Africa Proncicularis. She, Caesarea, says it was to be an honor. Her olive hands were such in contrast to the stained dark table. He was lighter, being a vandal, and the offset had always tickled him. Marjorie was the name of some renown. She was known for her beautiful singing voice, the use of the timpani, and for helping Bonifacius in some of the most underhanded stationary activities during the 3-year campaign against him. Ha! Marjorie the criminal, Marjorie the plague's nest that has poisoned the wells of Sano, which is canned before him and his roving dogs of Flavius Felix consumed each other? Braver to state that name to him, of all people, having just made his decision clear by sending me to Bonifacius. Such a woman of such ill repute and foul looks would never be tolerated by her crew member, Caesarea. My father was a comus of Bet Gurgus and Alexandria, loyal to the east. My Nago, a Corinthian mother named Margaret. Come. There was education and grace in her voice, an element that put Tolga ill at ease, as it wasn't often he felt outclassed at the baths. He unseated and followed her with some garb and a brisk walk past the servers to the pool closest to them. What are your thoughts on the peace between the Empress and my good count, Greek woman? Tolga answered. For the fires are meant to settle sacrifices demanded. Well watered would that be, he argued. The waters of coitus some beasts must be tamed, my lord. You are too aggressive like a bull with your fearsome head and counsel the fortune of seas and themselves. Loosen yourself with me. You make me as nervous as the Pharaoh stallions among the mares, he said quickly, his lifetime experience not sufficient for her overbearing scent and oppressive sex. She pressed a finger to his lip. The Greek woman was robust, with tight fleshy buttocks full of sustenance and a shocked haircut. Her strong legs hilted beneath her bones, gotcha and neck angular face with aquiline features, and his skin was so light gold and constant that Tolga took impression to it that her legs were gold, also tanned by the African sun before coming here, as her calves shone in white tan all over her entire body with the texture of well-applied dust that graces the skin and the lips warm and silkily, except on the innermost interior of her mounds. She only roses at first from her heart and smooth neck. She leads him by his hand at first, and then the base of his beast. The taste of her breasts changed from pallid self-service of saliva to a sweeter, wetter, and warmer as she increased in activity. Her scent was very, very muted by her body, which was good. As he seated, she proposed that they should unclothe themselves. Tolgus was farcically incredulous to the request. She might have taken notice to his very cold extremities, or whatever the reasons. This was more than tolerable, and how he had known as a cold, unyielding man before she placed his hands upon her chest, where he began to adventure. She tossed aside the cuirass and glided her hands over her chest with no caution at first, then more aggressively massaging, she reached for the bottom of the pectorals. She had the taste of a healthy inner gum he had forgotten. She had very large, tastefully low-set breaths, and she was much heavier than she looked, although he very much liked the way the light forms of the white eclipse above her stomach, indicating a lighter tone than he perceived in the dark lights. Very swell, but without the texture of sinew, rather perfectly rounded except her knees, which were similar to his, indicating the athletic past. He couldn't lift her, only try very hard as it was. He remembered waving off his guards in Sagittarius way as he pledged to take her. By now she had begun gracing his abdominals and chest in a lavishing motion, and he tightened his chest and stomach to be appear fitter than he was to her nails in an attempt to impress her. She scratched his chest vigorously and pinched his nipples. Her breastbone and cleavage formed a perfect funnel for her enjoy. How good she smelled. For each time that he kissed her warm inner chest and nipples, occasionally offering his teeth to her shining body a wash, he began to playfully punch his eyeballs with her breasts. He didn't use his tongue yet, wondering if he could brave a flicker. The pleasure began to outweigh the pain, and he didn't stop his affectionate hand and mouth play. Your melon isn't the only part of you that's misshapen. I can see why they call you Four Fingers, she teased him. Because I have 4 fingers on one hand? He held up his hand with 4 fingers, one separate and aborting. He'd begun working both of his hands over her body in patterns, and paid no attention to her upward body as well as hips, legs, and buttocks, which were very warm. He paid attention. He played with her cat and eye as she leaned over him. There was one thing he had noticed. He made it smell like a cocktail of earth and gutter and smoke and wine and vomit, which him was nothing at all, but it took someone else to remember the scent of fresh skin, no matter how much he bathed. His pelvis churned in mind as he lost himself, gifting 1,000 kisses from his wretched lips. Spider, some nod and ambrosia in a goat flesh, not the Toledan cask money, the sickly, sweet, bitter swift of honeyed liquor, she purred. Who was Spider? It sounded familiar. The little urchin from his boat. He tried to think on it, but felt only warm flesh. The spider brought the flask and gave it to him, and the woman urged him to stand with rough hands on his buttocks. His thoughts were fuzzy. My captain Tolgus dropped his loincloth and gave her a flask. He pressed over her to relish her breasts. Sagittarius, with a frown on his face, and I watched from a distance. Tolgus slumped over the Greek one, suckling like Remus. He had spilled some of the wine on his new grips, we noticed, with morbid fascination at the demise of one of the strongest men I had ever known. It was blood, a sully thing in darkness from a puncture already. My hands became trembling. Only in the warm mist calmed me. I thought to approach and plant my dagger in my stomach. By Christ's savor, I thought better of it, as Bonifacius would not have an outright brawl on my hands. Instead, I nodded to the mates of the Nitrum Sagittam, who each approached and one after another stealthily stabbed once at his heart, while Caesarea held a scarf over Tolgus's mouth. A note was left by the spider, whoever this little man of his crew was, to the mighty and the generous, the fatherly Triarchus Tolgus. Treacherous Togus, you've climbed the heavens with your lumpy head, the wings of the dung beetle have often spread. For those you blinded before you were dead, look on the bright side, your brows were hung before they had fled. The body was moved to the Count's men, who had no cause for celebration, nor did we. Those who looked upon us had no hostility or loyalty to us, but in disapproval for our methods ensuring it resumed so. We endeavored to make a life in this pocket of land before the coming storm. Sagittarius, his second mate, or Optiu, had approved of our contingency and quickly signed on with the Count, making Lycurgus and I second command on the vessel, in deference to each other. For the coming summer, we followed along with late Captain's ruse and joined the fleet of Aspar, which returning to the Aphrodisium to travel to Kalama, where he invested most of our earnings into a parlor. This was as much to eke a profit as to placate the men upon the boat, who did not all approve of the pretenses in which Togus had been found dead in the company of a Roman count. Most of them were paid by Sagittarius, who would settle payment in the captain's absence, and were loyal to his pay and little more, but the illusion that discipline never led to infighting or the death of a ship's crew was shattered, and this made them uncomfortable. There had never been a mutiny, never been a murder aboard the ship, except for hostages, and it was honor among thieves. The parlor, located on the outskirts of the town, which we called the Palm Olive, was a distraction from Togus's death, where they could drink and play dice in Roman garrison's company and take money free of consequence. Romans who had never investigated the death of the Thermae would never approve of thievery or marauding the seas under Asper's command. Flavius Artibur Asper, known in the Persian tongue as the Horseman, was a hard master and very influential in the East as well as the West. It was said that should something go awry in Roman Africa, Aspar, an Arian Christian as I was then, thus having something to prove, that he would be the last to relinquish any power to Genseric. As a result, his domesticus, Martian, sent as many men to join us in the province, and many of our patrons lived in both empires. Instead, we took to sinking smugglers, pilfering anything of value, and auctioning it at the Palm Olive. We were rakes. Roman ships which found contraband would have to turn it over to the judges in the district of Zaba, where most of the proceeds would go to the cities, but it was our property, and it could be bought at a fraction, no tithe to Caesar applied. The parlor also had a small rink where iron bullets were thrown down a woolen board towards the heavy wooden pins that would topple one another, a relic of the old game of Donner's Thunder from the north. My thoughts were dispelled by Shark Eyes, a man of Aspar, placidly snapping his fingers and saying, "Roll." He motioned for the pins before me. If I could break them all, I stood to escape his smart grunt with Caesarea before a fight broke out. I focused and thought of what led us to that point. Our spider spoke in the slang of the garrison, the youngest always picking it up quicker, and made an impression quicker than now that he was young, not to be taken advantage of. He worked for a pickpocket at a time until there was a dispute where he came near to being caught, and only escaped through pity. And Sagittarius forbade him to take any more after that. We set up targets inside the parlor for Sagittarius to show off with his Parthian bow, with folk often betting how much he'd hit his mark, and even a few challengers. In a few months, none could best him. I continued rolling with Caesarea with zest until a soldier became jealous one night in early May. The word around the parlor was Genseric had expected landing a reward for coming to the aid of Bonifacius, who was a busy man and weren't on speaking terms ever since he had to make a body disappear from the party we threw in his province, and soon afterwards then served to him without question. When his soldiers learned that a reward wasn't coming out to greet them, they bothered the women in the Sativus and committed crimes, among 1 in 10, which was a heavy number of trespasses in Roman Numidia, and more with Bonifacius was agreeing, not allowed, to tolerate. And more than Bonifacius was agreeing, no, allowed, to tolerate. "Forgive me," I said, grasping for Caesarea's arm to take her from the company of a well-shaven, long, black-haired man. The soldier had come from the east, serving in Asper's armada, and he was cultured sort, with black shark eyes, and long bags that dropped over his unwrinkled and unscarred skull, with no furs of age and no furs of sadness. Not even an encounter with Caesarea could rise a squall of emotion from them. Navies were in short supply in the twilight of the empire, and a force that would have to defeat us would need to control the seas. We called this man the statue. Almost being devoured by fish would do that to a man. He called himself something else. "Your men have cleaned us out in that game of pins, Johannes," I called him. himself, pointing to his chest. A man of God's new city on the strait, a man of curiosity, a man of no lack of travel for his master, the young General Martian, domesticus of Ashbar. The Lord says, forgive your enemies, I say, remember their names. And what is yours? He gave a flex of his shoulders to me. This one was not alone here. He had guards, more than enough to ensure that peace was kept. I'm not your enemy, man of Ashbar. Chisrian was away to see Ennius in the Gemini Thermae. You're brave, pup. She's just been hearing me out, Johannes said to me, with no menace, just straight words. Gal, this man is a gift from Theodosius II to Rome. He's a gift to me, by the way he has his telling his story with that honey tongue of his. Perhaps some new marks for Ashbar on the counter on the telling. Caesarea smiled at me, assuring me that Ennius, our procurer of wine in Kalama, could wait. The shark-eyed man spoke. I was speaking of my travails for Flavius Ashbar in the past. We're on a merchant vessel in the east at the last time. I'd been in the Mare Africa on a country called the Vitahara. We were given assurances by Gallia Placidia that, although word had ceased between us and Bonifacius and her, trade had not. Bonifacius had no intention in his own empire, we knew then, and we knew now, that he turned the Vandals who were working in fields, not as armor, swords to plowshares, as they say. I was young then, but not as young as the butchers who rammed and boarded our ship. Berber and barbarian who threw my crew to the sharks. They seized my letters to Gallia from Martian, servant of the empire, danced my gifts from the word over to Yelmota, and killed my captain, and as for our diplomat, not even an apothecary was spared at the blade. But I, well, a child younger than me had other plans for me. Don't throw him to the sharks. They're his chums by the look of his eyes, the child said, nicking my black eyes with a hooked knife. The bearded captain, a swarthy sort, who clearly saw him as some kind of son, asked in the language of Germania what they should do with me instead. There, said the boy, pointing to a crag of rocks peeking over the savage sea. I protested. Starvation and the sun boiling my flesh were not preferable outcomes to the fate of my crew, but as I protested, I noticed something beyond the bands of archaic scribbling on the chart of his arms, the language of the Puni, which I understood, giving instruction to some figure he considered his mother. My chained greaves stinged the boy's hand, throttling my throat blue-black. Only when the blood is up and only when the blood is thin does this happen. The child serving with the band of members was a noble of some fair barbarian ilk. I looked down at the shark. My arms were naked and I sighed, then thinking about how little to expect oneself's attire. I did not remember the memory, but I remembered the plunder of the Vitahara well. Who could forgive it? They gave me some motley collection of boards to float off on and spared me of the sharks. But instead of finding my death on the rocks, I followed the charts in the language of Baal on the boy's arms, found my way to Malta, and there I stayed until the next boat took me home. And now I'm here again to punish vandals reaching out for what's not theirs. Sagittarius, the proprietor here, has just told me that my men have been recalled to Kalama, where you can fetch your wine. I'm assuming you're thirsty, can't have them ransacked it. The horde has arrived early and is not being pleasant company. I don't know about 80,000, but 10 lectures should be easy work. Let's kill some hours before we crack skulls as guard there. He examined my face, looking for some resemblance to some figure from his past, his memory, tracing the lines of my face as if there were a matrix. He grinned, the first sign of happiness, looking at Caesarea as if they should keep me as a pet. The spider was sneaking up on him, and just a few more moments, no, the Easterner had definitely planted his fist in the spider's groin. Her eyes went wide, and he fell to the ground. Not only the guards of this man, Johannes, but our own crew burst out in laughter. There, pick up Donner's thunder and show the lady here that I'm not the only man around for the work to come. He shrugged. This bastard was going to nail me the same way he rolled over the people that came to our parlor. The balls were weighted with zinc, just like the roll on one side of the board. Our pommels were steel, but the ball was zinc and iron. It would stain my hand throwing it. Who knew how close my father and mother had been when he bedded her? He nodded curtly as I walked over to the rink where the polished board lay and the heavy pins of oak beyond. My eyes said I was a man already, my words said I was a man already, but a man would turn and press my blade to the Eastern Roman neck. Instead, I bent and hoisted the iron ball, keeping it plastered to the one hand. Roll, my child, Johannes said calmly. My friend Lycurgus raised an eye and scowled. I hesitated, then arched my arm back in a crouch to throw. I relented and took steps back to re-aim. Roll, he insisted. Sagittarius, who had been observing the spectacle and suddenly announcement, said, Let's clear this place out. Bonifacius will not want to receive guests late. Take a bush elephant or horse to every house on the way and gather the guard. This broke my concentration, and I just burst into action on an instinct. I let the ball loose and struck the pins, knocking over the fourth with a series of cracks. A fifth pin wobbled in the straw and then found its balance. I wringed my hands and walked in the direction of Sagittarius, who now held his bow, a silent assurance that he didn't want things getting unruly. As we left the parlor and the lights were snuffed out for the night's journey, Johannes asked Sagittarius, "Who are you to obstruct the Emperor's justice?" "Well, don't you just know it all?" said Sagittarius. "All privateers are starved of proper food, and none of us have thin blood. Don't forget in this district, Gallia Placidia Regent rules," he answered, patting him on the back, slinging his blow on his own. "Yes, it seems you can dress it up however you please here in the crumbling West," he shot back. Caesarea was dismissive of the tension between us and the sour-faced guard of the Eastern Roman. "He's ready for the work to come, I'm sure of that." She snuck her stinking tongue at Sagittarius' eye and hugged the man, catching up, squeezing his arm. We had routed the break and citizens to reassure. I was a man. Lord knew how many bastards I'd seen in the brothels of Kalama to prove it, and now I'd be fighting for them. I glared after Johannes, but Lycurgus shook his head in protest. "High in the favor of Asper, who owns Marsh, and high in the favor of Theodosius. We're little men to Asper, who watches and waits," Lycurgus said to me, snuffing the candle and swathing his face in a white rag. When we arrived at Kalama, the morning was nearly upon us. A riot was not the scene that greeted us. Amid the maze of streets led by cedar palms, the hundreds of refugees had formed a vanguard, not waiting for the mighty army of the Vandals behind them. They were pleading for aid. In reply were chants of "one being" and "learn to obey before you command." By the Romans, the murmuring of the barbarians were not fit for the company to share their lodges. Before long, the phantom of rape had spread to the rumor to a prejudice, and the women were bolted within the buildings of the Civitas. Among the most welcoming were the clergy, who did not make a point of the newcomers' Arian faith and made beggars of themselves to the Roman citizens of Numidia to help the throng back on its feet. The Latin Church immediately housed many of them who were too beaten down from the trek to move another step without collapsing. We had not been sent here to deal with the beaten of spirit. There were some among the Vandals who were afforded better furs and leather, and their eyes were hungry and lustful. They cased the alleys and storefronts with thieves' precision, not that of an occupation, but enough to make their armed presence known, and when asked, they said they were there to protect the first comers from being cut down from the malice of the locals. And always shadowing these men, who carried axes and roughly forged black swords on their backs, were a pair of riders. These riders held banners of the Hastanian lances, although in the dim light one might seize them as emissaries or scouts. As the flame flickered close to them, their cruel eyes belied that we were seeing that the footmen were uncontested as they systematically took posts around the town. We would harbor none of them at the Palmolive, but that was a decimum away. We came to the dwelling of Carcianianius, the Mari wine merchant, who was outside and in conversation with one of these stark rovers, and sure enough, two riders watched from through their iron helms, gleaming a bit in the dawn, so they wore a typical type of frayed chain over their leather bodices. Johannes, who had come on a horse, had ridden forth to speak with the riders who bore the sun disk of the Vandalic hosts. His three horses were to the right of the road, and to our right, or the east, were the first glimpses of sunrise above the building, which was a winery of Carcani. Within, the lights, which had all been lit to keep an eye for any thieves of approaching migrants, held tens of barrels of jugs of wine, corked and sealed wax, and the stamps of Gallia Placidia. Our visit was more important, as those who had arrived might have some coin and be looking to drown their troubles as far as civilization would permit. There we could make some easy marks of them at our parlor. 2 years had passed, and Carciani had become a valued trader with our enterprise. The two wolf-like men spoke Latin and were demanding that Carciani bring forth 4 flagons of his finest wine in tribute to the arriving Genseric, whom they were quite certain would be named Vicar of Numidia by the strength of his army alone. Carciani beckoned us closer, and the 3 of us, Lycurgus, Antyrus, and I, approached to help him with the migrant's request. "Gal, your shipment is well, and a good boy. Be a good boy, and fetch 4 flagons of Caesarea destined mint for these tired souls. Domitianus should be able to bring them for you," he said, exasperated with speaking with him. Domitianus was one of the slaves who worked for Carcianianius. She had met a man who had promised he would stay with her, but his promises had never been made good, so she remained a slave with him, unable to be free as her husband. Has her husband returned from the seas? I asked, casting a baleful eye on the two scraggly wolves at the door. She should have known better than to trust a word of a sailor. Maybe she'll teach me that lesson in time, Kirkian answered, saluting Sagittarius and clasping her hands in embrace. I walked into the warmth of the winery where the workers and slaves were awake, their eyes frantic, not quite to do with all the noise and tumult meant for their jobs, their freedom, and their master. I walked past the kegs and pressing room where Domitiano was huddled up in a crouch. How has he been treating you? I asked her casually. Good, better than the two of you agreed even. When will you tell him, Gallerith? She had said hastily, looking a little nervous to the small child tight in her bed socks. I won't. I'll buy your freedom and take you to the parlor where you can start to work. Once you have enough room, you can make your own choices. I will marry you and will do very well with Bontebash's sponsorship. You don't have to worry about losing me again. The crisis is coming to an end, I said, picking up the small boy in his limbs and hoisting him up to look me in the eye. The bleary-eyed child made his out to cry and then became sedate and looked perplexed into my eyes. He saw an esteem there he hadn't seen before. I poked my son in the nose and he cooed, and then I placed him back in his crib. She grasped two flagons, smiling. When I got the other two from the shelf, I beckoned for her to follow. We exited the winery where the two vandals squatted, speaking with Sagittarius. Gifts for son Genseric. These men are a welcoming party with deep pockets of silver, Antares answered. Splendid. We'll need kegs of pig swill for all I care to keep our hands off this while we wait. They eyed Domitiana as she handed them the flagons one after another and said to them, one of them said, his goatee reaching to his chest wrapped in twine. Is that your wife? He asked. No, she's like a baby to me, answered Carpiani. He looked to his comrade, looking over at Domitiani, hissing as she curtsied. He slapped her lewdly and ripped out a hoop. We'll be taking the slave for the festivities, then, he said to Carpiani. Taking the slave? Asked Carpiani scornfully. No, I'm not a brothel owner, and even if I were, I do not lend my girls out to strange barbarians, he said proudly, shaking his head. We'll need her for several days. Those horses have enough coin for you to sleep well, even if she is your mistress. 2,000 silver stamps of Honoris's empty head. He jabbed his finger toward the horses, which Johannes took as a rude gesture up on his horse, still speaking with him. I seized the moment and interjected, I'm familiar with Vandalic cupbearing for the arrival of kings. Her duty would include dancing, I guess, no advances for men, pouring drinks and looking pretty. Carpiani, it should be fine. Domitiano looked at me with surprise, fear, and revulsion. Golly, you're fuel to ask one thing and ask another. Besides, she has a husband, he stuttered. Nonsense, I'm a vandal. I'll watch over her for Genseric's arrival. Go fetch that 2,000, 200 more for your kegs of mead, I said happily, motioning the vandals on. Gallerith, you do not own my winery. Stop this at once. Her husband could free her for that much, Carpiani demanded. Yes, guy, don't be boorish, Sagittarius warned me. Who's asking him, unless he has veteran blades of Cornutus inside that cask of his? Asked one of the vandals. He nodded to one of the riders who signaled the cart to be brought forth. On it were bags of coin inside a half-open box. He used the word Cornutus for the horned regiments of veteran foederati who served in the Western Roman Empire. They were mostly stationed on the mainland. I shouldn't go, I won't go, Domitiano began reply. Then shrieking. Some calls broke out into the street if she needed help. The first the soldier walked toward the rise, I placed my hands in her and told her as calm as I could, No, you won't go. And then my eyes became wild. Swinging my dagger from my shin sheath, I lunged onto the back of the vandal who was walking away, tackling him. There was a pop of grizzle as it popped the back of his neck again and again, ripping through tendons in a quick search for the cord there. He flailed around, viscerous hanging from his neck like a carved bird, and attempted to raise his axe. I gouged the eye with the thumb of one hand and bit hard into his thick, grubby finger, grabbing the axe. I bit until the blood swelled up on my gums, spitting the frayed skin from my tongue. And then, as he panicked and the handle fell from his hands, I buried my knife in his eye. Sagittarius had begun wrestling with the second of the footmen, who attempted to reach me and split me with his sword. I was too close for him to use his bow, and his sin of arms were not muscular, not as strong as the ox-necked barbarian. Neither mattered as much as I picked up the axe handle of the fallen one, slick with blood, and hacked into the skull of the vandal wolf. I was not a strong boy, and at first the axe head just scraped the bit of the eyebrow clean from his face, from which no blood flew, and he smiled, numb from the blow, honing his sword on my heart. Just a welt then that poured from the maroon mess. I swung again to his chest with the dull edge. I felt the ribs crack, and there was a high-pitched pop wheeze, and I was covered in phlegm and spit. Sagittarius flung himself at the second footman before I hacked again to the vandal's skull, this time welling up a short pink geyser of brains and severed matted hair. The bannermen who carried the silver on the cart behind them, towed by two more footmen, thought at first that I was the only belligerent and wanted no violence with the Roman garrison as they lowered their lances, ignoring Johannes, whose life I had endangered, and that of his two men. Johannes was not willing to see this go any further. He turned abruptly on his whinnying horse and slipped his sword through the crevice between the neck and helm of the first rider, who fell like a stone from his horse. The second rider knocked him from Johannes's horse with the breath of his lance. Tied to his horse, he sagged, dangling, holding onto the panicked beast as the bannerman positioned himself to dispatch Johannes. A pylon of Johannes's guard and an arrow of Sagittarius' Parthian bow struck the rider once he slumped over in the saddle of his horse. The man had been an Allen, and the drive swayed the scalps of his enemy, ringing that saddle. Not another one to be taken. Lycurgus charged forward with his white robes and a spear toward the cart, which dropped from his frightened hands, which quickly they brandished swords. Some of the Vandals foraging around the shelter cried out for mercy and took account of the attackers' appearances, Germanic as they were. I saw the disdain in the eyes of the people looking upon a traitor. Bandits, after all, I've saved your neck, shouted Johannes in outrage, climbing back upon his horse in a huff. Be calm, Johannes. I will visit your end tonight. Keep that cock of yours for later. Ride off and join the garrison until there's been a riot at the winery put down by the crew of the Nidrum Sagittam. Caesarea hissed at him, slinking out of the saddles with her falchion lying cool on Johannes' naked thigh. Sagittarius' eyes fell in the dirt by the footing of Lycurgus and the remaining two footmen of the Vandals as they fought, but I wanted this to end quickly. I swabbed the axe on my tunic, drying the blood, and rushed forward, grasping the axe with both hands. The two circled the beleaguered Lycurgus, who jabbed and kept them at bay with the spear. When I neared, I threw the axe, a Francisca, with all my might, and struck one of the fighters with the handle and weight. He dropped his sword out of breath, and I charged. As I darted by, I slashed the shirt of the first of the footmen with my knife, and then supplanted the axe from its earthen berth with my free arm. I jumped him and swung down not only once but 5 times until his fingers were wiggling like worms, and there was just a mess of gore where his skull had been. Above where my blood-flecked face leered. This bastard made my sandy hair red. The last Vandal began running, though he had more support, but he was not as fleet as Lycurgus, who chased him around a corner towards the elephant stalls and pierced his leg with a spear. The Vandal threw down his sword and begged for mercy. The beast bellowed in the sounds of carnage outside, and I whirled the axe until the man was back to the stall, and Lycurgus and I threw him where the elephant's summer mush would trample him. His squeals were drowned out by the anger of the bush elephants who crashed around in close quarters. I was trembling with fury, and it took Sagittarius' approach to snap me out of it. Doing the Lord's work, are we? Doing the Count's work? He said besides himself, placing a hand on my shoulder. The spoils are yours, I said rightfully to myself, shaking off the battle. All told, we gathered 4,000 silver coins, 1,000 solidus of Honorius's mint, from the deaths of 6 men, whose bodies we dragged into the elephant stalls to be trampled beyond recognition. Sagittarius was furious with me until he learned how much I had managed to steal by fermenting the faux arrangement and murdering the Vandals. The trove of solidus was unexpected and may have been to purchase board for the arriving Vandals. I convinced Sagittarius to allow me to pay Aeneas Carcani 2,400 coins for the freedom of Domitiani under the agreement that he would be able to visit her at the olive palm. Carcani gave us wine from the parlour, and the warning of the city guard would be looking for us, so we could do no further business with them. The child, whom we believed was sired by an errant Roman, would come with us to the parlor and be cared for. He now knew who we truly were, and his protests that the Roman would try to take the woman back were muted by what I had known to do to the imaginary men, a contrivance of the two of us. After this, and several other incidences between the town of Kalama, we knew it would not be safe for soldiers on the premises, and we retreated back to our parlor to wait negotiations of the approaching king. Caesarea stayed the night behind in the company of Johannes. Caesarea and Johannes had spent the early morning in the rigor and vigor that came with it in the inn for Roman soldiers, and they spoke of many things. Johannes feared that Genseric would make outrageous demands and have less patience for them once he saw the violence in the town. Caesarea meant to allay his fears about fighting alongside former pirates and assure them they would fight for Boniface, whatever happened. She made sure to tell them that there was no better way to prove their loyalty than by Gallerith's reckless actions. At first she had intended to rob him of valuables, and when she learned he was not only educated but passionate and a strong lover, she decided to spare him and make a makeshift ally in the town. If that is Vandalic justice I do not want it for Africa, Proconsul Laius, then I will tell Martian Aspar himself as much, Johannes said to Caesarea in the room at the inn. The sun rose and the morning had come. The chaos of the night before was a memory for those who were finally finding their rest, and most of the migrants had found lodging at the church or streets themselves filled with rubbish. My captain's ilk are not all savages, just those us born to the sea. It's a tempest, you know, Caesarea responded, winding her fingers on Johannes's chest. I know that too well. That's why I rebuke him. The East has a saying against Eric, and that he sails plainly against those who God is angry. He is a man of the winds, a man of these seas, like your wild friends. Gallup had put his son in the slave's belly. He was protective. There's a reason for all violence, she answered, giving him a gentle kiss. I know this too. I fear for Africa because I have a wife and daughter, and I'm no less protective of. Then why do you see anything in me, Johannes? If there was anything you do not know, anything I can teach you? There is. I'm here to learn from your kind, to learn from Martian Damascus of Bospar. Tell me now, how did that wretched boy, likely the one who wanted me dead on that rock, learn how to fight like that? He couldn't have learned it on the seas. I need to know all your strengths, even half-grown ones. He hoisted up and turned her on the bed, held her down. Tell me, how did the young vandal learn to fight so early? His people under the King Gunderic had once held a kingdom in Galatia. So desperate were the federated kingship of the Visigoths that they brought grain from the Vandals at extorted prices, and some even tried to flee to Mauritania, as the great king Genseric has. They failed where he succeeded, and the two successors of Adolf II and his successor Cedric, were both assassinated under pressure from the Swabians who ruled from Lusitania and Vandals alike. They realized they would need Roman sponsors once more. A king named Wallia pushed into Spain to reclaim it from the hands of Maximus the usurper of Honorius. King Wallia knew that he would have to break the other groups as on the run as well, and that included the Alans under King Artaxerxes and the Silingi. Galler's people were not only the only one people. They were divided between these three crowns. The Visigoths drove the usurper out and delivered him to the emperor, whose bane they had once been. The Swabian king Hermanegarius routed King Gunderic's army at Merida, and the Vandals fled south, right under the gaze of the Visigoths and King Wallia. The Alan king Artaxerxes was killed by the Visigoths on the Tartessian Strait, the rock that leads to Mauritania. Seeking protection, they asked Gunderic to fight for his liege's people. Gunderic agreed, but to do this he would need not just men who could fight, but boys. One of those boys was Gareth. Long before Tolgas had lured him to the promise of the sea, little Guy was a child soldier for Gunderic, on the eye of his father Pallidus, who was killed in battle against the Swabi. He was a vulture, a rag picker, a bone breaker. You can learn a lot about how men died by sorting through their bodies. He would scavenge the edges of the battle and watch those with interest, warriors who survived the fray. He would ape their movements, and without even knowing, be taught discipline. He would take the art of practice on dying men. He learned that the brave did not survive, nor the mighty, nor the vultures. The vultures survived. Others sought to impress the king. He endured. He grew more canny. With his victories, he brought bolstered numbers of Silingi Vandal and the younger generation, with three peoples joined as one. This meant less food to go around, so after his father was buried, Gallerith had figured he had killed for nothing, and would learn to kill for himself. An opportunist, then, hardened by luck, Johannes answered, holding her tight. Most Vandal veterans are. You live and you learn. You've forgotten the Romanitis. The West is full of survivors, opportunists. It has relied upon survivors from Germania for too long. The East still has stamina, discipline, and iron will. It's time for you to teach me again, she said, grinning wide, very much taken. And she was a hard woman to impress. Apollo rose on the sun disk of the Vandals, and their aquathor was raised. The Spear King Genseric waited on the heights of the west of Kalama along the coast of Numidia. From his tent to tent woven ornate in better times of Baetica, he could see his promised land, the golden land, bladed in the sun red, and his son was his wife. His unruly son Huneric and Heldica would teach him to follow the Vandalic way. His father, the High King of the Vandals and Alans, was 39 years of age when he became king, and 41 by the time his people had reached Numidia. The blue ocean that had birthed them crashed upon the wind could be heard with pipers, starlings, and gulls from their encampment, where hundreds of tents dotted the coastal landscape that gave way to sprawling fields. Among the thousands of soldiers in their pure-witted helms of iron, who would rise to distinguish themselves? Who would change the fortune of his people in service to Boniface or otherwise? The golden flax billowed in radiant waves by the dying sun in the new land he had led his people in exodus, so like his hair in the wind above the high brow, the cheeks reddened by the sun, even his Roman nose ringing his sky-blue eyes. 3 columns of Vandalic travelers walked with baggage trains towards Kalama, snaking through the fields. It was mid-May, and the flies were a problem for the caravans. He walked with the dropping gait onwards to the tent, and gave instructions to break it on strong legs he had seen a lifetime of walking and sailing. Robbed of his ability to ride from a horse, exiting at a young age, this gave him time to fraternize with those who could not afford a horse, those people with sharp tongues that held weight and virility among the horde. And his preposterous Regni, second in command, held could climb upon a horse beside him, always waiting for his master's word. His half-brother Grunderic had ruled a kingdom in the northwest and south of Spain for 21 years before he had become king, and now pressured by the Visigothic kingdom that favored Aetius and his Suebian menace, they had, facing starvation, come to Africa. His brother became not 1 year when on the 28th of August in the year 408, the Western Romans showed us how they cooperated with the Vandals, and the Stilco, the half-Vandal master of armies, and his young son were put to death, along with thousands of Gothic and Vandal foederati by Cyrus. So they had run, and when their new home in Spain had outlasted their welcome, they had run again, to here, where most of the empire's grain lay. 3 of the empire's main granaries at Ctesiphus, Hippo Regius, and Carthage, all round now on harvests, but that would not last. His people intended to settle and work the fields, but before they could settle they must rest, and the trial was not over. These lands had seen us coming from Ctesiphus, and the other villages sparsely covering their wake, but now Calama he would meet the land's masters. He had visited the Frigidarium, the welcoming bath as cold as a tomb, to forget the heat in Ctesiphus, which was the capital of the district of Zaba. And there had not been a long welcome, with no dwellings afforded to his men, only to the women and the chieftain, and the tents had to be kept nearby. The diplomat of the Empress Regent, Darius, had made peace between Sigabulchus and Bonifacius, and now, by an expedition of Africa's lord, was abandoned, and it had lasted. Bonifacius would have welcomed the Vandals at his borders as fresh troops, truth be told, wary ones, and they would eat. Bonifacius' demands for complaisance be damned, they would eat and rest their weary bones in baths, where the grime and sand would wash off along with the blood from their sandalless feet trekking through the desert. They would know the cold room, the Frigidarium, as their chief had in Ctesiphus. Many had suspected Bonifacius had called the Vandals to his aid specifically to settle in the west, but the truth was Genseric would not order finality to his people's march until they had reached civilization, and that meant walls could be entered and infiltrated for the betterment of the Haustingi. The forerunners had reached the edges of Roman civilization already, and there was a thin line between greed and salvation, between the worlds meeting another. There had been riots already among those who had filtered into Calama and begun making demands. Violence would be punished, and the host was gracious enough to meet them with no hostility. Genseric's demands would look more palatable if chaos didn't break out between the newcomers and the denizens of Calama. Only when their backs heaving heavy burdens collapsed on feathers or hay and linen, or would he be content, and the horde only allowed to collapse when the goal was reached. And when Bonifacius showed his Christian virtue that he was so proud of, and acted the Good Samaritan, and gave them what was asked by an army of 20,000 soldiers. Some said he, Genseric, wanted to be Vicar of Numidia, some said he wanted the Vandals to be citizens, but what he wanted at all was equal terms with the Romans at the table. His soldiers wouldn't force that much. Osper of the East had his thumb on all affairs of the Romans, home and away, but he was in no position to mediate now, sending servants to keep the peace instead. The situation was thus, that the great migration into Africa had been spurred by the civil war between Gallia Placidia and Boniface, and now that they were at peace, Boniface had no more need of the Vandals trespassing on his lands, and Genseric was eager to get what he deserved for making the voyage, as it was the Western Romans who had put the Vandals in Allison's plight to begin with. With their meddling through their intermediate servant in King Wallia in Baetica, even earlier Bonifacius had been a thorn in his brother's side in Spain, and would have succeeded if he had gotten with the second general sent to tame him. Now Honorius and treason against Stilicho was gone, but the Visigoths remained allies of these Romans in the western Spain, farther south to Hispalis. Not only had the Vandals left, but they could never return without a bargaining chip. His boys had the rank of Tannery and Offal, the Garum and the shorter ones, all anchovies from their uncouth member, all hide-wrapped skins, furs to the harsh nights, and leathers that gave shelter to their pale bodies, not designed for the heat of this month of May. If you were an animal, a tannery would cause you to shit yourself. Foraging for months without shelter or pillage to sustain them had made many of the men animals. They harassed even the highest of women, seemingly unaware of the price they would pay if they were caught. They stole when they could, and were well aware that the lowest of men, death might be a light punishment, over desertion and decimation. Soon they would have a reason to live, to behave, and to use their swords and armor that weighed upon them. Soon the shining wonders of our Avandi would know what the future held, and it would not entail being held back. It was the summer, and the summer bred more flies, but devils splitting in the heads of men. They would be forgiven by him, forgiven by Boniface, but to be certain they would not be sent back to hell. Summer would be a season of hot tempers and respite for them, or else.